If you've been on the internet for any time at all, you've probably heard of executive dysfunction. But did you know that there are actually 8 executive functions and all of them can go wrong and lead to different forms of executive dysfunction? Yeah, today we're going to talk all about those 8 forms of executive function, how they go wrong, and how you can cope. Hi there, my name is Megan. Welcome to Neurodivergent Magic, the YouTube channel for neurodivergent content. All right, let's dive on into it. The first executive function is impulse control. And when this is going well, it's basically like your impulses are like visitors at your house. You can either accept them inside or you can turn them away, but you have a choice. And when impulse control is going poorly, it feels like you don't have a choice. You feel like you either have to act on it immediately, leading to excessive impulsivity, or you have to turn it away immediately, no questions asked, which can lead to excessive inhibition. Both are examples of how impulse control can go wrong and lead to executive dysfunction. So how do we cope when impulse control goes wrong? We have to learn to trust ourselves, because impulse control issues at their heart comes from this idea that you are not a trustworthy source, that you can't make good decisions about what to do or what not to do. So instead, you act on impulse. So to improve your impulse control, you've got to improve that trust in yourself. If you want to learn some more practical ways to cope with impulse control issues, make sure you check out the link in my bio to my new course, Executive Dysfunction: How to Cope When Your Brain Won't Cooperate. This course covers everything we're going to talk about in this YouTube video and so much more, but it's all in a nice condensed format. So it'll take you less than an hour to go through the whole program, and it comes with really helpful reflection worksheets that are going to help you get to the heart of your executive dysfunction issues. Okay, executive function number 2, emotional regulation. When this is going well, you're able to feel your feelings without feeling trampled by them. And you're able to actually feel them instead of totally numbing them out. And as you might have guessed, those are both examples of what emotional regulation looks like when it's going poorly. Either you refuse to feel your feelings or feel unable to feel your feelings, or your feelings just totally overwhelm you. They drown you. They totally stampede you and you feel out of control. The best way to cope with emotional dysregulation, in my opinion, is something called EFT tapping. So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, and EFT tapping is basically when you tap really specific spots on your body, and as you tap, you talk yourself through the difficult emotion that you're experiencing. I think EFT is a really great way to bring out those emotions that you might be struggling to feel, and it's a great way to sort of dampen those emotions that are overwhelming you. The third executive function is something called flexible thinking, and when this goes well, basically it means that you're able to see nuance and ambiguity in situations without feeling stressed out by it. If you struggle with this, that's okay. I do too. If you struggle with flexible thinking, you probably have a lot of black and white thinking, seeing everything as either this way or that way with no in between, and no ability to change. Honestly, I think the best way to improve flexible thinking is to simply become aware that you struggle with it. I didn't realize for a long time that I struggled with black and white thinking. I just thought that's the way the world was. Things fit into nice, neat boxes and categories, and when they didn't, it made sense to get unreasonably frustrated. Learning that I struggle with flexible thinking has allowed me to be more flexible, because I can notice when I'm doing the black and white thinking, and I can pull myself back and try to force myself to see some nuance. The fourth executive function is called working memory, and this is basically the ability to hold information in your head while working with a different set of information. And a lot of neurodivergent folks really struggle with working memory. So if that's you, you are not alone. When working memory is going well, you are able to hold that information in your head and work on different information without losing the original set of information. But when working memory goes poorly, it can kind of feel like information goes in one ear and out the other, even though you really were paying attention. Honestly, I think the best way to cope with working memory is to write stuff down. Write stuff down as much as you need to, and do not be ashamed of it. Do what works for your brain. Even if other people wouldn't have to write it down, if you do, that's okay. There's no point in needlessly struggling just so you can seem normal. You're neurodivergent. You're not normal. And that's okay. The fifth executive function is self-monitoring, and this is basically your ability to monitor yourself and keep track of how you are progressing towards your goals, how your identity is consistent in different environments, things like that. So if you struggle with identity issues like me, then it could be an executive dysfunction issue related to self-monitoring. You may just have a really hard time monitoring your sense of self in different situations and noticing what's consistent and what's not. Instead, every situation feels like the truth, and how you're acting in this situation is how you really are, despite evidence that when you're in different situations, you act differently. Time blindness also falls into this category of self-monitoring because it's difficult to monitor yourself moving through time accurately. So how do we cope when self-monitoring goes wrong? I think journaling is the best tool because it's really hard to keep track of who you feel you are and your progress when you're keeping track of it all inside your head, which, like we've talked about, is neurodivergent and works a little differently. I think it's way easier to track your progress and to keep track of who you are as a person when you can look back on paper and see, yes, there is proof that I acted this way, or there is proof that I am progressing towards this goal. It's written down right here. The sixth executive function, task initiation, is what most people think of when they think of executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction in this area means you have a really hard time starting stuff. It could even be stuff that you enjoy. You just really struggle to get yourself to start. You know if you start, you'll be able to keep going, but you just can't get yourself to do that first step. If you struggle with this, I want you to know that you're not lazy. This is executive dysfunction. This is a misfiring in your brain, and it is largely outside of your control. But that doesn't mean there aren't ways to cope with it. My favorite strategy is something called momentum, and it's basically where you give yourself permission to back off of the task that you're trying to accomplish and do something else that makes you feel good. And then once you've got those good feelings going, you'll have some momentum built up and you can tackle the thing you're really struggling with. The seventh executive function is planning and prioritizing. When this goes well, you're able to look at a big, complicated task, break it down into multiple steps, and organize which steps should go first and which should go last. Now, if you listened to that and you were like, oh my gosh, just hearing that made me feel overwhelmed and I know I can't do it, then you might have executive dysfunction in this area. Executive dysfunction in planning and prioritizing often looks like not knowing how to tackle a task and not knowing where to start, which sort of seems like it would be task initiation. But remember, task initiation is having trouble doing the starting. Planning and prioritizing is having trouble knowing where to even begin. The best way to cope with this, just like with working memory, is to write it down. Break it down into smaller steps by physically writing down what those steps might be and then reorganize them on the paper. If you want, rip it into different pieces and have each individual task on a different piece of paper and organize them out in front of you. Finally, the eighth executive function is organization. And to me, organization is healthy when you have categories that make sense to your brain and everything fits neatly into a category. With some flexibility, of course, because of our flexible thinking. Poor organization, on the other hand, is not just when things are chaotic, because things can be chaotic and organized. Poor organization is when you don't understand the categories that things fit into. For instance, I could organize my closet by type of clothing, but I could also organize my closet by color. Both of those strategies are perfectly valid forms of organization. The only thing that would be poor organization is not knowing what categories to sort stuff into, and so it's all just a hodgepodge. If you're struggling with organization, I highly recommend body doubling. Body doubling is when you have somebody in the room while you're doing something, and for neurodivergent folks, it can make us so much more productive. It clicks something in our brain that tells us, right, it's time to get into gear, let's go. So those are the 8 executive functions, how they can go wrong, and how you can cope when they go wrong. As always, thank you so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss more weekly content all about neurodivergence.